Thank you very much, Roger, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The first massive challenge we have is that we only have 15 minutes on the counter here. I'm very worried about it. And the second massive challenge we have is we have to follow Jennifer. We're going to do a gallant effort. So firstly, I'm from CGAP, as you've heard, and my team, which I will quickly introduce, are from all over, so to speak. Starting on my immediate left, Tashmia Ismail from the Gordon Institute of Business Science in South Africa, responsible for their Inclusive Markets program. Berniece Hieckmann from the Metropolitan Life business of the MMI Group, responsible for strategy and change, whatever I say now, because she won't disagree with me. Grace Obuya from Kenya, Commercial Bank of Africa. I nearly gave you the wrong employer here. And she is also responsible for strategy and change management. And then my brother from Uganda, and the reason why I say that is he's the only Ugandan that can actually speak to me in my language, Afrikaans. And we both like rugby. Paul Musoke, Director of Change Management and Building Service Markets at FSDA. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you to MasterCard for giving us this opportunity to share a little bit of research and experience on the change management topic. Now, the first thing I want to do is I quickly want to position this. Then I'm going to ask Tashmia to just give us a framework and a little bit of feedback on the research they did. And then we are going to experiment a little bit and expand the panel. We're not going to ask the panelists to speak. They must be quiet for a while. We're going to make you the panel here in the room, and we're going to ask you questions after that. Then we're going to turn to the panel, and we'll end with you as well. Well, I can't go on without recognizing another person, and that is Kendall Barrett, that's actually leading the change management research work at CGAP. So Kendall, thanks for your assistance in the work we did here. Now, I have about 2 minutes to position the change management topic, and I thought I'll start with giving you 4 sort of divisions of thought. First, we will have to make the case in this process for financial inclusion and for customer-centric approaches. Second, we will have to learn from our customers somehow to be able to provide them what they want. Third, once we have that learning, we have to take the learning and design for use, and I'll come back to the use story just now. And then fourthly, we will have to organize ourselves, this is the financial service providers, for delivery. So I'm quickly going to cover those 4 areas and then hand it over to Tashmia. Now, we always speak about the 2 billion accounts that, the 2 billion people that still are not formally included. But let us turn to the 3.3 billion people that are 15 and over in the world that are formally included. And that 3.3 billion accounts is about 90% accounts from financial service providers and 10% mobile accounts, just to give you a little bit of a feel. And that is in the developing world. If you take the whole world, then it's about 98% financial service provider accounts and 2% mobile accounts, according to Global Fundex. If you look at the use of those accounts, and we can disaggregate use in money into the account and money out of the account, then we find that of that 3.3 billion accounts, only somewhere between 45 and 50% of those accounts are used at least once a month. The rest are not, for getting money in. And about the same measure for getting money out. Now, if you then look at the other side of the story, that 60% of those accounts, roughly, very roughly, are not really used in a way that you can build a business case around it, then I would go so far as to say that the business case of financial inclusion at the international level doesn't work. And it doesn't work because the accounts are not used. So the question then is, why do we see this low use? Now, we argue, and we've done a lot of work around it, that it is largely because there's not enough value in those accounts. to be used. So the clients or the customers receive money through the accounts withdraw, and then the accounts are left, or the accounts are dormant, like 20% of bank accounts in the world. So how do we make this work? How do we get use? Now, we always say our next point is we must learn from customers. We must go and understand what they want. What are their needs? How do we deliver on these needs? So, and I'm not going to stand still today on the learning from customers, but I want to make sure that you have the sequence. Making the case, learning from customers, design for use, and organize for delivery. So, and now we have the information we want to design for use, and we come up with beautiful human-centered design results and concepts. But that's not enough. It's inadequate because you have to deliver that concept. You have to implement it. And you will remember Nick Hughes last night saying 80% of the effort in delivering the service is an operational challenge. And therefore, we are so focused also on organizing for delivery. And here is where leadership plays a role, culture in the organization plays a role, and change management plays a massive role. And this is where I want to hand over to Tashmia, because they actually went to several firms and interrogated their change management approaches and how you get from point A to point B. Over to you, Tashmia.
Thank you. Thank you. So hopefully I'll get my beautiful work of art up, which is this. Thank you, Gerhard. Thank you, Kindle, for spending weeks on transcripts which we processed to come out with this product. We started initially with desktop research, looking at change management. And what was overwhelming was the number of articles that have been written on this, peer-reviewed academic articles, literally millions. And what the bulk of this research showed is that most of these initiatives fail. So when we went out to do our interview process, we found these change agents, we found these executives that have been part of change processes in their company, interviewed them and started to assemble, assimilate, consolidate the methodologies, the chronologies of how things happened, and the stories around how change was successful and sometimes where it wasn't. And this was partly how we assembled the panel today, because some of the literature and stories that we used in assembling this map came from our panelists. Now, one of the underexplored areas that we found in the research was this behavioral side. And we've heard a lot of really interesting information on behavior, and we've looked at it on the consumer side. But these behavioral insights are as important on the inside of the firm in dealing with employees in the whole, as Grace describes, this talent management process. Now, there's some brilliant work done by an author called Charles Duhigg on the power of habit. And some of the stats from his book is that 80% of what we do every day, 80% is built from habit, is done from habit. And this habit translates into the organization, into organizational routines. This is where legacy comes from. This is the way things are done around here, the cycles of how we do things and why we do things. And the metrics and incentives are built around this. And the only way to shift these habits is to make a concerted effort and build structures and processes. So just a little question in the room. How many people have either tried to stop smoking or tried to give up on afternoon donuts or tried to start an exercise regimen? How many people? Just a show of hands. Okay. So many of us every day either try to stop or start. Stop bad habits and start new habits. And for those of you who are trying it, it's hard. It really, really is difficult to shift habit. And so this is what we see in organizations. And this is why so much of the change literature shows failure. Because organizations can't break habits. They know they need to change, but they just can't take action. And we littered with examples like Kodak. This very 20th century commodity-based model. I know I have to change. I know digital is here, and I just can't do it. So these are the 20th century dinosaur organizations. And so I'll start on the map and show you this journey that we have built. It's very metaphorical. And this is gone to sleep. There we go. So we start on the left of this map by looking at this elitist organization floating on an island of its own in a stormy sea. And this organization starts to do the diagnostics, the head and the heart, the rational brain and the empathy-led models. And this rings some alarm bells. The ship is sinking. The edifice is crumbling. I would argue organizations like Sony are sitting here, alive but barely. So once this diagnosis is made, we then have the captain taking his troops and loading them onto these galleons. But if we look at these vehicles, they're old vehicles. They're not built for the speed and agility that is required today. And the captain sets strategic priorities, creates a new vision and value, really important in the organization. And we've seen a lot of organizations do this part really well. Set up visions and values of what we're going to be, who is this target customer. And very quickly, the captain hits the shore. Everybody disembarks from these boats because everybody wants to get to this utopia on the other side. The customer-centered organization, the customer at the center, and the organization part of a community. But first, we need to get over this mountain. And if you look at these paths, what we noticed in companies in the early days of a change process is everybody still tried to navigate this change with their old systems, old processes, old tools. So what you see here are the various silos in an organization. The digital team has its own vision, and the finance team has its own metrics, and the marketing team has its own way of doing things. And nobody works together with the customer at the center. In the examples of organizations that we saw who were successful, they were able to orchestrate these different paths. They were able to create offices and leadership that allowed people to work cross-functionally across these silos. And only once they integrated and used a whole lot of tools that we know are out there for you, were they able to create a new vehicle to navigate this terrain. And some of these tools, we've heard a lot about them. The customer-centered design tools, using technology, using storytelling. Grace and Paul are going to talk to us about talent management and how coaching is a really great methodology to manage the anxiety of people as they try to navigate this. And here's where the habits literature and the anxiety and the people management become so important, because shifting to this new structure is accompanied by a huge amount of organization. I've used huge 3 times now, so it's really important. is an incredible amount of organizational anxiety. People want to hang on to ways in which they know how to do things. When we ask people to change the way they do things, it's seen as a threat. A lot of ego, a lot of expertise is tied into the old way, and you're asking people to abandon this. And so you might have great data that you've pulled from the market. You might have incredible ideas on what you could build, but actually making them happen and moving out of a culture of incrementalism becomes incredibly difficult. But if you're able to craft this balloon, if you're able to empower your frontline staff, if you're able to put the customer first, create these cross-functional workflows, build an empathetic culture and an innovation-driven organization, this is what we hope to see. We hope to see you genuinely put the customer at the center. And one of the critical points here that we saw that held companies back from getting to this state was what Gerhard had asked yesterday in a question. Are we creating enough of a story, enough of a set proposition around value to customer in the long term being about value to company? That actually in the long term, if you aren't adding value to a customer and creating a prosperous community for them to live in, value to company is short-lived. Now, we have on our panel Berniece from MMI.
And questions.
Oh, shall we do the questions first? We have clicker questions. which is a very fun part of this. So before we head into Berniece, I'm going to ask you to vote on these. The first question is, and we're going to actually use this data in our study, change management succeeds when? And I'll leave you to read those. So please vote. I would argue that they're all important, but we want to see which you view as being the most important.
And voting is open. You can go right ahead. We're okay with time. Have you, well, voting closed.
So if we look at three...
No, you must, yeah, come on.
If we look at 3, break the legacy of old behavior and systems. Who answered to that? Create a show of hands. Why don't you tell us why you chose that? Because we couldn't decide which was most important, so we're really interested to hear. Thank you.
This on? Yeah. I think all 3 are critical, important. I think 3 is the hardest to do. So that's why I picked that one.
The hardest to do.
Hoping that you can tell us how to.
Okay. Someone else want to add to that why they maybe picked 3 as breaking the legacy being the hardest or most important? Jennifer? Jennifer, did you see we changed the gender diversity on the stage a bit?
I chose 3 from experience. When we were transforming, we had those 3 questions. And we felt we need to stop being micro and begin thinking banking and plus. And that, the systems are very difficult at that point.
Great. Someone at the back that has a... Kendall?
I made a loud comment that I tried and it didn't work. And it's because we tried the first 2 and then it didn't work. So when we tried the 3rd one, it needed more adoption than change. So if you introduce kind of small steps ahead with people, because you don't want to fire people, do you? I mean, if you want to be responsible, and of course some people will leave, but you still want the old talent, and you want everybody to learn at the same pace. So it's, in my opinion, if you don't have the 3rd one, in my experience, if you don't have the 3rd one, the first one won't work.
That's very helpful. I think we're going to the second question. Oh. Could we get the second question up? So what do you believe is most effective in creating a culture and a system of customer centricity in the organization? And again, I'll leave you to read which of these you think is most effective. Is voting open?
No, it's open.
No, it's open. Results are ready. Voting's closed. Ooh, this is tight. 3, create a system of incentives and metrics for employees, which is geared towards creating good customer experiences. You like that? Again, a show of hands for people who voted. Can we get the mic over here maybe to get some, if you're willing to share?
Because I'm sitting in front of the mic. I'm speaking from experience as well. I worked in a financial institution where all of the systems internally were completely geared, and the incentive scheme for the client service center staff was geared towards making sure that the customer is satisfied and having the best interactions possible. And actually, it's a South African company, Alan Gray.
So you get what you measure.
Go to one of the other
There's someone over there. Olga would like to.
Number 3 worked for the Rwandan government, so it might work for institutions as well. So that's why I chose number 3. KPIs.
There was someone else around there that had a hand up. We'll get one more comment. Over here. Over here, the lady with the yellow scarf. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Miriam with Equity Bank Equitel. I chose number 3 because I think with digitization, you need a rapid shift in terms of how you do your KPIs and reward, and it's not product-oriented because it's self-service for the customer. And so we have to look at the end experience of the customer experience and the service experience, and I think that's the shift we have to go to.
So in particular, these metrics are around customer experience and customer satisfaction. Does anybody want to argue for one of the other options? If you have a strong argument that we should hear. If we can get the results back on so we can remind people what those...
So I think empathy is actually the most important thing, and I think it's the most scarce human capability on earth, is putting yourself in the other person's situation. And what really helped me excel at that is I was a marginally successful novelist before I had to work for microcredit as a living. But creating believable characters forced me to put myself in their position. But I find understanding where the other person is coming from is exceedingly difficult, particularly in organizations.
Very nice.
It's gone to me.
And shall we give you a chance? There's someone in the middle of the room over here also.
My name is Sanjay, and I think that we are talking about change management of existing organizations. So existing organizations would already have metrics for a good customer experience. So what's new about this?
That's an interesting one, Sanjay. I refer you back to the survey that we did at the beginning of the symposium, the one that MasterCard did. And I found it interesting in that survey that we moved from 55 to 75% of people or firms who actually deem themselves to be customer-centric. When we run the diagnostic, thorough diagnostic on customer centricity, even looking at KPIs, we find very few firms that actually answer to the requirements of having the capabilities to be customer-centric. So there's sort of a difference in opinion where we start from.
And there's also, a lot of the organizations we saw were measuring things with an outsourced company, but how well they acted on the results of those surveys was also the differentiator. So having the data and actually doing something with it are different things.
Go to the next question.
I think we'll go to the next question. In your experience, which of these customer-centric practices are most difficult to implement? Voting's open. I think we'll stop with this one and on to the next one. Closed. So 42% integrated ways of working around cross-functional teams, and after that, using customer insights to create and deliver better customer experiences. So I'm really interested in people who have comments on the first one, because we also found this to be very difficult in organizations. Can we get some comments on perhaps your experiences around integrated ways?
So who voted for that?
There have to be more hands in there.
There's Deborah here and somebody.
Okay, thank you, Tashmia. Yeah, I think it looks like to me we are created probably organizations that are designed to be specialists of only one thing. What it means is simply we are born as probably, silos, if you mind, and bringing those different perspectives, different mindsets, and different priorities. That's really the most difficult one. So we work as departments. So I have only a finance wing, I have only operation wing, I have only marketing wing, and etc. Never really bringing it together to look at one solution, one customer with the same eye. I think that's why it is probably challenging.
Someone else at your table?
Hedwig Siebertse from the Alliance of Green Revolution. I think we are in the middle of a change process as AGRA, and I think what I see is maybe related to what the man in the back said. It's a willingness of understanding the work of your colleagues. If I'm a seed breeder, I only know seeds, and I think seeds is the bottleneck for farmers to increase production. And if I'm a soil scientist, I think it's fertilizers that are going to solve the world. So it is indeed thinking from the customer, thinking from the smallholder, who needs everything, markets, fertilizers, seeds. But it's very difficult because you are a soil scientist, you're a seed breeder, you're a finance person. So it's very difficult to, I think, to get empathy and to really be interested in the work of your colleagues and trying to understand what their challenges is in their specific topics. Because we are trained as specialists. We're not trained as being customer-centric, as solving the issues around the customer.
Thank you very much.
So there's this siloed lens or this particular lens that you put on and letting go of that and accepting others, yeah. I think there was a comment here. Please.
Yeah, we'll take one more and then we have to close this session to go on to the panel.
Great. Hi, I'm Deborah Drake. I work at the Center for Financial Inclusion at Axion. I mean, this makes me really think of sort of the whole process of new product development. I mean, the sense of everyone comes up with really good ideas, but how do you get it to be executed? And it's not as if there's just one good idea, there's several. So I think the issue regarding silos is very true. I think a lot of institutions, I would say my own as well, don't really have a good process for actually starting out with the idea and the design and getting it to the final stage and getting agreement and buy-in. So I do think it's just the overall sort of function and process of how it works and really thinking of like, how do you get an idea to market? I think that's I think one way that one needs to kind of take a look at, and it's a challenge for all of us.
Thank you.
Right, while you are getting ready for your discussion, I just want to add something as well. I think we often look at change management as a specific process within firms, but we are also looking at change management at the policy level, and change management in terms of how firms work in partnerships with other firms and how you jointly get from state A to state B, which fits so nicely with the discussion this morning. So I think you have to think quite broadly and quite widely about change management rather than to contain it as a very thing that we just use in a firm to get in the same direction. So now over to you, Tashmia, and let's hear what Metropolitan has learned in their change process. So we undertook to give you the real world and not what we are going to do, which we quite often find when you start with new work. And here we have some good cases.
So, and this is how we built the map. So it was very much based on cases, real life cases. So Berniece, when we met for the first time, you had said you felt NMI was in a bit of trouble. And you're in a very different place today. You're on a change journey. How did you start out diagnosing yourself? How did you decide you needed to do something? And how did you create this compelling case for change?
Thanks, Tashmia. So a little bit of context. We're a 100-year-old company. We've been around for a long time. About 6 or 7 million clients have placed their faith in us. And so you do tend to get quite comfortable. For my peers and colleagues who work in life insurance, you will know that the way that the business is valued, there is nothing more profitable than an insurer that's busy going out of business. Because when you stop the new business, of course, the profits from years gone by start to flow out and you don't take a lot of new business strain. So where we found ourselves was in quite a profitable situation. But we also landed up with one of the biggest distribution forces in South Africa where we operate. But we also had the worst productivity. So we had scale, but definitely not excellence. And the other thing that we noticed is that this decline into mediocrity is so smooth and comfortable. It really is. It's as easy as breathing. So for those of you that may wonder if you're in the middle of it, here are a few triggers for you. So you'll start to see a slowdown in your new business volumes. Your shareholders start to get a little bit antsy and irritated with you, so you'll end up going into that expense squeeze where you try and spend less and less money and shrink yourself to greatness. In doing that, you stop investing in all the right things like your systems and technology and your people. What happens then is that your systems become end of life, very old and cranky, a little bit unstable. Your people also get a little bit cranky and unstable. And your culture suffers. So then, because your people are not really on the top of their game and not really getting a yay Monday at the beginning of the week, so your processes start to suffer and then your client experience starts to suffer. Now, one of the saddest things for me working in emerging markets is that our clients get disappointed before they get angry. And it's really, really difficult to look your client in the face and he's saying to you, I'm so disappointed in you. I think when, for those of you who are parents, you know that it's easier to get a hiding than hear your dad say, I'm so disappointed in you. So that's kind of where we found ourselves, is that we'd gone right through that spiral. One of the best ways that I could think of with hindsight to look at the diagnostic is the most efficient businesses are those that get to balance their stakeholders. So client centricity doesn't mean client at all cost. If you're a profit-making company, you need to balance your shareholder, your client, your employees, and your regulator. And if you want a clue about whether there are problems, have a look at your operational reporting. If you find a common theme, you will probably find a place where your stakeholders are unbalanced. So the clearest and most evident one is if you are measuring persistency, like we did in one of 52 different reports, then you will probably understand that your employee and your client is very unbalanced. Your salesperson wants to sell the biggest premium for the most amount of commission, and your client wants the smallest premium for the largest amount of value. So that's where we started, is we realized that we needed to go and rebalance our stakeholders.
Another piece of the research that we saw across many organizations was that this values-led change management process was really important, creating human connections. So it wasn't about just the qualitative spreadsheets and what the data was showing you, but really connecting at a human level. And you have some interesting stories around that.
Yeah, so maybe continuing on the theme of balancing stakeholders, I think we needed a catalyst to create change. And like, I suppose, every other financial services company on the planet, we decided that the shift to client centricity was the catalyst to change strategy. So then we started to say, okay, so how can we get these stakeholders balanced? And maybe if I can share 3 stories with you. We started with the finance department, which seems a strange place to start. Because most people start with the client. But what we did was we took our financial people, the people who manage the money, to go and watch our clients shop. Now, our clients don't shop with trolleys, they shop with baskets because money is a little scarce. And they stand in the queue, and when you've put the groceries through the scanner, a lot of our grocers could take a lesson in client centricity because the till always faces away from the client, so you haven't got a clue what's going on over there until somebody swings it around and says, this is how much you have to pay. Then the client would look in their wallet, and invariably they would be short. If the bill in South African rands was 400, you would find 350 rand in the wallet. Now, one of the worst client-centric experiences then happens is that in the grocer, they start to flash lights and ring bells and tell the whole store that the person standing over here doesn't have enough money to pay for their goods. Truly dignified experience. And what needs to happen then is that the client needs to select something to put back. And if you look at what the client puts back, it's not luxury good. It's not chocolates and potato chips. It's chicken and nappies. Because you have to then make a qualitative decision to maybe go and get your nappies at the spaza shop. So in having our finance department watch this, we realized that this is the way we need to spend money, because that's the way the client's reality actually works. So nowadays, our budgeting cycle takes us 1 week. We basically figure out how much value do we have to bring to the client, how many of the clients do we have, what's the shareholders' cut, which says this is what you can spend. Figure out how to do it the best you can with the best excellence. So I think that was the finance story, and then maybe just 1 or 2 stories about the client situation where we realized maybe about 10 years back in my career, I embarked on some consumer education, beautiful PowerPoint deck made in the lofty aisles of a financial services company. And I was speaking to a small rural community about savings, financial education on savings. And this elderly lady got up and she said she was quite worried about my credentials to talk to her about savings, because she pointed out that unless I could raise a family of 4 on 1,500 rand a month, which is less than $100 a month, perhaps I wasn't qualified to have the conversation with her, and that I should sit down and let her do the talking. And so on that day, I did sit down, and she stood up, and I suppose my education began. And what I did realize is the market that we serve is smart. They understand the value of 1 rand or $1 much better than I do. And I suppose that's why, with humility, we've approached this market-led type of client centricity, and our approach to actually providing solutions with clients changed a little bit. And then maybe just the last story about making sure that our employees, the gentleman at the back spoke about empathy, making sure that our employees understand clients. Planning a financial plan is one thing. Sticking to it is very different. Tashmia spoke about sticking to the diets. And what we needed our employees to understand is it's not about the plan. It's about helping the client get back on track when life derails them. So where I realized this happens quite often is we had a client who'd paid us for quite a long time and then stopped paying us. So I called the client and I said, why are you not paying your premium? And he explained to me that his son's school bag had been stolen. And in a budget where there is absolutely no flex, what do you do? Do you carry on paying your long-term insurance policy, or do you get your child a school bag and school books to carry on their education? Now, clearly he prioritized the school bag. But the saddest bit of the story is he said, when I came back to you and said, I'm back, I can get back onto it, you said to me I had lapsed and terminated my relationship with you. And that's where we realized that employees need to be able to empathize, not to provide the plans, but to keep clients on track and to be their coach and mentor in financial wellness.
Just in terms of the shifts that you made, one of the biggest was around how your frontline advisors managed clients. Perhaps just briefly talk to us about that dramatic shift in that frontline staff and how you manage them.
So I think maybe just 4 things. The first one is just ask yourself how many people are allowed to think in your organization. Because we figured out that if we could get 6,000 frontline people thinking and not just going robotically about their work, we would be able to harness the power of lightning. So we designed a model, an incentive system that encouraged behavior rather than transaction, and gave space to people to think, look up, see real people, stop seeing policies, and empathize. So you give them enough boundaries, you give them very clear direction in terms of which behaviors you want and which you don't, aligning to both your client and your shareholder, and enable 6,000 people to think for your organization instead of the 5 or 10 at the top. So we created the aligned incentives. We created models for adoption, which allowed people to pull change instead of us shoving it onto them, because people are not furniture. And then we created these digital platforms behind them because we need to be cost effective. I read somewhere that in a digital client-centric world, what would you automate? If you're an airline, would you automate the pilot or the air hostess? And I think the answer is the pilot. So we created this culture in the front of aligned incentives and the ability to do meaningful work, empathize, and think. And the results for us after we'd implemented it, look, it wasn't easy to implement, and I won't go into detail around the change model, but there's always a lot of people that don't like it immediately. But the results for us is after implementation, over the last 5 quarters, we've improved business by 20% growth quarter on quarter for 5 quarters in a row. We increased our market share by 20% in 9 months. And we were also voted the insurer that is most trusted and most aligned to clients' needs. And if you listen to the words that the clients were giving us, they were saying, this is a company that treats me with dignity. This is a company that treats me with respect. This is a company that gets me in the moments when I need them the most.
Thank you. That's
Thank you very much.
There are other questions for Berniece, but because we're talking about talent management and employee management, and because Berniece mentioned the anxiety that accompanies this would be a great place for Paul to start talking about his methodology, and he's going to chat to Grace for us as well.
Thank you, Tashmia. Some of you might have noticed I have a very long name, or a very long title, Change Management and Building Services Markets. And as FSD Africa, one of the things that I do is identify financial institutions which are focusing on embarking or implementing game-changing strategies, ambitious strategies aimed at financial inclusion. I'm working with about 11 institutions at the moment across the continent. And one thing I'm realizing that the challenges around change management are really around positioning the need for change within the organizations, and also keeping that need alive while you're implementing the change process. The other side of it is also the anxiety that it brings to the individuals who are involved, not just those who are implementing the change, but also those within the organizations who are affected by the change, but sometimes we don't really realize it. So we find that coaching is an important tool to help organizations position this change within the change management process, the need, but also to help the individuals who are struggling with this change to be able to cope with the change. So we're promoting coaching as part of the change process. We also find that coaching has to be placed within the organization as part of management of an organization. So it should be a process where it becomes a culture of the organization holistically. So it's part of how you manage on a day-to-day basis. But we find that you need service providers available within the markets, within the institutions are operating in, to be able to provide these services about creating a coaching culture within the institutions. Without the service providers nearly or closely available, it's difficult to actually utilize coaching as a tool for supporting the change process. So that's when the second part of my job, building services markets, come in. So FSD Africa has decided that we'll focus on building change within the market around coaching as well. So we're basically supporting the growth of a coaching market within Africa. And the first thing that you do there is identify where coaching sits within the region. So we did research in Nigeria, in Zambia, and in Kenya, just to identify where coaching was in 2013. At the time, there was hardly any coaching at the time within the market. You also need to create awareness of coaching within the C-suite of the organizations. And we embarked on a program to actually provide coaching services to 30 C-suite executives across the continent, with the support of Creative Media from the UK, Strathmore Business School from Kenya, and recently Career Connections from Kenya. And I'm mentioning this because it's showing how we're also building capacity within the market that we're operating, using more Kenyan firms and more African firms to support this. So we ran this program and we got 10 CEOs initially to participate in this program, and they got coaching for about 6 months as a way of introducing them to coaching, what it can do for them, and stimulating demand for coaching going forward. We identified and worked very hard to find coaches from the African continent who are qualified, who are accredited, who could provide these services. So basically the pairing was pairing coaches who are African but international standards and coaching CEOs from within the continent. We did a lot of work to identify them in 2013, and we identified 9 coaches who are accredited internationally, certified and accredited internationally. And that was a good number to start with. And that's why we had a small number of CEOs to start with. So we paired these ones, and they worked together for six sessions of coaching. What we discovered, because we only identified 9 coaches on the continent, we realized they need to support institutions that train coaches on the continent. So part of our program is to identify institutions which can train internationally certified and accredited coaches so as to increase the supply of coaches within the market. So we're looking at institutions in Uganda, in Zambia, in Nigeria. We already have 2 firms in Kenya who are actually doing a good job of training coaches. The other thing we realized that as we're trying to start this market and stimulate it, you need to have some kind of control of the quality and the delivery and even consumer protection of the people who are taking on these services. So we decided to set up a board, advisory board for the financial sector executive coaching board. And we've brought in people from the coaching side, professionals from Africa, and we're looking for financial institution practitioners into that board to look at how we can support coaching bodies across the continent, but also to ensure that we're signaling the quality that is the right thing that people should be buying in terms of coaching.
Or maybe we must now move. Maybe let's move just over to here.
So basically, Grace Obuya here was one of the first 10 cohorts of the C-suite who participated in our coaching program. Grace is from CBA, so I'll let her ask her a few questions to tell us what the experience for Grace has been. So Grace, just quickly about CBA and your culture.
I think my colleague was here earlier talking about CBA, so I think you've by now gathered that in CBA we encourage risk-taking, exploration, and innovation is pretty much a part of our culture.
And why did CBA take on coaching?
We identified coaching as an important intervention for our organizational transformation in 2012, and 3 things drove the need to pick up this intervention amongst others. The first, obviously, is a changing market environment, which anybody in any sector has experienced in the last 5 years, be it the competition or the nature of the consumer. And the second change was really organizational. We defined a new strategic direction, and the strategic pillars we identified as very key to achieving a very ambitious growth plan were partnership, innovation, and excellence in customer experience. So obviously, as an organization, we had to define a talent management strategy that would ensure we can deliver against these pillars. And the third aspect that then drove us to select coaching as one of the interventions is between 2012 and now, our staff numbers have doubled, but apart from doubling in number of employees, 65% of our employees are Generation Y, and our managers are largely Generation X and some baby boomers. Now, this diversity in dynamics presents both challenges and opportunities. This group look at life differently, purpose, the role work plays in their life, and how they engage with work. And therefore, before you give them a compelling reason why they must work towards achieving this ambitious growth plan or implementing this strategy, you must understand their motivation and what drives them to work. So those 3 things really drove to our choice of coaching as an intervention.
And take us through your journey of building a coaching culture.
Yes, in terms of building the coaching culture, we used a phased approach, both in terms of markets. We operate in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. So we decided to take a phased approach, starting with the Kenyan market. We also decided to use a phased approach in terms of levels of the organization. So we identified, in line with our partnership as a key strategic theme, we identified partners who could work with us to deliver executive coaching. So we worked with Creative Material, Career Connections, FSD, and Strapo Business School. In addition, we then invested in developing coaches, managers as coaches. So initially, we trained 15 senior managers as coaches in 2014, and we engaged them to then support the organization in understanding the outcomes of a 360-degree survey results, which was part of the talent management strategy, and then to help teams begin to define their development plans against the competencies we identified as critical to delivering this strategy. And then the next intervention was then to, in 2015, extend the coaching for the next level of middle managers. And then this year, we have then finished the last batch of middle managers in Kenya, and then training all employees in coaching, because it's not enough to equip the manager to be a good coach. It's necessary to prepare the employee to get the best out of the coaching experience. And key to that training or that development is to say, there's the individual journey for your personal growth, but there's the organizational journey. How do you match the two to get the best in terms of the strategic transformation that we are trying to achieve?
Okay, Grace. And just one more question. Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples, practical examples of what came out of this journey? Mm-hmm. And then how did this coaching process affect the change management process within your organization?
And we're going to ask you to do it in under a minute.
I'll try. You cannot use coaching in isolation. You got to work it into other initiatives you're running. So if you're driving excellence in customer experience, we've used individual coaching, buddy coaching, so employee to employee, and team coaching to drive certain initiatives around customer experience. And obviously, if you picture a scenario where you have silos, the finance department doesn't understand why customer experience is saying, let's do everything for our customer, and you drive team coaching and buddy coaching that's cross-functional, you begin to break down the silos, and you begin to have different groups working towards the same outcome, using obviously their core functional expertise and roles to then work towards a common outcome, which is the customer experience excellence, for example.
Thank you very much.
You should encourage people to chat to these two over the cocktails this evening. They're an absolute reservoir of brilliant information on real practical steps you can take inside the organization. Thank you, ladies.
So we would really like to actually take the next session's time as well and tell you those stories, but Roger will wipe me off the stage. So I think we're going to stop this here, and I just want to make one remark. When you speak to Grace and you think about the absolute exponential growth we had in Commercial Bank of Africa over the last few years and how it must have strained and stressed the systems, then you realize how important this is to actually make sure that this organization stay on the rails. You will hear much more of this topic as we go along, and it will be built in the CGAP guide. So I want to thank my partners in crime here. I apologize that we went shorter than we discussed, but we ran out of time. Thank you very much, and this is the end of the session. Appreciate it.